question, which is what are people allowed to do? Now, obviously, by the way, and I'm aware, as you always are, of the deep desire of bad faith actors to seize anything I say in this discussion and misrepresent it. So let me do a very boring piece of throat clearing, if I may. The idea that people's response to any problems in their society should be to go out and commit acts of violence is obviously insane and wrong. What we're seeing on the streets of the British cities, though, raises this question, as I say, of if the public keep saying something to the politicians and the politicians keep not just ignoring them, but insulting them, what are they allowed to do, these people? These are populations that have every single election, like the rest of the British people, for 20 years, they have voted for less immigration and been told that they'd get it. And instead, it's just gone up.
Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray ignite a firestorm of controversy, diving headfirst into the UK's boiling cauldron of cultural tension. Brace yourself for a no-holds-barred dissection of grooming gangs, immigration policies, and the rise of Tommy Robinson. From Rotherham's dark secrets to the silencing of the white working class, Peterson and Murray fearlessly tackle some of the most contentious issues of our time. Watch as they unravel the complex web of political correctness, censorship, and societal betrayal that threatens to tear Britain apart.
Let's start with something contentious, I suppose. Tammy and I went out on a limb recently and interviewed Tommy Robinson.
I saw.
Now, I've been watching Tommy for a long time, and he's struck me as particularly interesting, well, for two reasons. The first reason, I suppose, is because he is a genuine working class guy, and for better or worse. And second, I haven't seen anyone anywhere who's been more unwavering in his commitment to reveal the atrocities of the grooming gangs in the UK, which are organized patterns of activity that are very pervasive, that are so terrible that it's almost impossible to talk about them without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. So now, there's no doubt that there are many things that you could accuse Tommy Robinson of, and many of those he would admit to. But to me, and also to my wife, fair enough. But the fact that he's pointed his finger at something that seriously needs to be attended to and has paid a major price for it is also not ignorable. It's like, do we expect someone who's brave enough to do that to also be perfect in every regard? That's asking a bit much, given that there's many people who in principle have moral characters much more unsullied than Tommy Robinson, who are cowering in silence constantly in the face of this absolute brutal atrocity. And so we interviewed him. And what did I think of Tommy? He's very articulate. He can certainly make a case for himself. And then I thought it was up to the audience to listen and to make their own judgment. Now, that was before the recent march that Robinson and his crew organized in London, which in my estimation, I'm interested in your perspective, went as peacefully and well as the protests in Ottawa, which it was modeled after. And so I thought his crew handled that extraordinarily well. Now, in the aftermath of those protests, of course, all sorts of chaotic hell has broken loose. And, you are much closer to such things than me. I mean, being a denizen of that country, I'm looking from outside, trying to make sense out of it. But my sense at the moment is that the UK is somewhat of a tinderbox. And so...
Yes, and I wish it hadn't been so predictable. I wrote about this so many years, warned about it. The Strange Death of Europe was largely my last-ditch attempt to warn my own society of birth and other Western countries not to go down the path that they were precisely going down. And as a former government minister said in the Times a couple of days ago, the thing about my predictions on that was that I made them not with any glee, but in a spirit of deep lamentation about what was about to happen. I see it. Tommy Robinson's a very interesting example of this whole thing. But let me just explain how I see it. This whole conflagration of recent days started when a 17-year-old went into a Taylor Swift dance class a couple of weeks ago now and started hacking at young girls with a knife. Killed 3 girls, 9-year-olds, thereabouts, wounded many others. And the news of that came out, and a very typical modern British, modern European, modern Western thing happened, which was that in the aftermath, people started to suspect something was being kept from them. Now, wiser heads would wait, but not everyone's a wise head after 9-year-old girls are bludgeoned to death, stabbed to death. So false information went out online saying that the attacker was had arrived on one of the many boats of illegal migrants that come across the English Channel every week. That was untrue. In fact, he was the son of immigrants from Rwanda. But people started to sense that there was a cover-up of some kind, or at least the news was being managed. The police in Britain seem always to think they're being very clever at this, and it's always seemed to me that they exacerbate every problem they put their mind to. They insisted that the young man was originally from Cardiff, capital of Wales, and people just sense there's something they're holding from us. Sure enough. Anyway, the point is that very unpleasant, ugly, and again, evil forces can get unleashed at such a time, the spirit of revenge. And some protests started peacefully at first, then some violent. A mosque was targeted nearby, and then violence started to spread out to other towns. Then Muslim communities started to arm up, in some cases literally, with people turning up with knives to defend their areas. This is all, and maybe it'll die down by the time this podcast has gone out, or maybe it'll get a lot worse. But the one thing you can say with absolute certainty is it's not going to go away, because all of this is the consequence of what I call the problem of primary and secondary problems. The primary problem in the UK, as in Europe in recent years, has been the total unwillingness of the political and other classes in the UK to address deep, deep concerns of the public. And when people said in recent days, how could anyone leap to such a conclusion that the attacker would be, and you go, because everyone's seen this before. You know, people don't actually forget very fast. The media class may, but they don't forget very fast.
The UK's inability to address public concerns about immigration and cultural integration has created a powder keg of tension. The targeting of a mosque in retaliation isn't just a mere hate crime, it's a symptom of a society where legitimate concerns have been suppressed for so long that they're erupting in the worst possible ways by people who have genuine concerns and paranoia about their safety.
That it's only 7 years ago that the son of Libyan migrants to the UK went and detonated a suicide bomb at an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester. They don't forget fast that 3 people who had no right to be in the UK, including one whose asylum claim had been rejected, but who was nowhere near being deported, went across London Bridge in 2017, hacking at the throats of passers-by and shouting Allahu Akbar. They don't forget that. They notice it. But the British government and others have had this very, very clear policy that they don't really know what to do to tackle that. They don't know what to do really to tackle the grooming gangs issue. There was another set of prosecutions the other day, and another case is coming to court in the coming weeks. You could say, well, they clearly do. They're using the law, but a lot of the public say, well, not fast enough, and not really. There's an awful lot of rapists still walking around with girls who are their victims in the same towns. And The government knows that the public ascribe this to the government's immigration policies, its integration policies, but the government can't take responsibility for that because they've made that mistake now. The Conservative government that just left power, that said that they would bring migration down to the tens of thousands a year, left office with a net migration of legal migration at almost 750,000 a year, which is, by the way, completely unsustainable, but they just keep doing it anyway. The interesting thing that Tommy Robinson speaks to and has always spoken to is, what are you allowed to do about this or say about this? Now, if you're me, for the time being, you're allowed to write about it sometimes. You're allowed to speak about it sometimes. You're allowed to raise alarms sometimes. You're allowed to speak your mind somewhat. But if you're a Tommy Robinson character, if you grow up in Luton and you haven't had many advantages in life and you've had quite a lot of disadvantages, and you're white and working class, what are you allowed to do about this? What are you allowed to say about any of this? And the government, for decades now, has had the attitude, you're not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to say anything. You can't do anything because if you do, we'll call you a racist and we'll call you far right. And this has all gone on for a very long time.
The UK is a ticking time bomb. Misguided immigration policies have unleashed chaos, with terror attacks and grooming gangs ravaging communities. The white working class is abandoned, silenced by accusations of racism. Government promises are shattered, with migration skyrocketing. Tommy Robinson's rise is a battle cry from the forgotten. Murray warns of a nation cannibalizing itself in the name of political correctness.
Well, it's an effective epithet, like when I first came across your work, and I've seen this reaction in the depths of my soul to many people. When I first came across your work, which is quite a long time ago now, I was leery of it. And I think the reason for that is that it's something like this, is that there are a lot of people in the world, and I'm not going to be able to meet all of them or read all of them or have anything to do with all of them. And now and then some of them get tarred with some epithet. Well, the cost to me of accepting that tarring is very low on average, because if I don't pay attention to some person, there's a whole bunch of other people I could pay attention to. So it's not like the pool of people to attend to shrinks, right? And that epithet of far right is a very effective brand of tarring. And it's even effective among people who are very skeptical of such things. So I'll give you an example. So I talked to Michael Schellenberger after he released the WPATH files, when he was investigating the absolute pathological corruption and craven cowardice of the cadre who presented what purport to be the standard guidelines for enlightened care to the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association. And he was appalled at their lack of competence and their ideological possession. It was another bottomless pit. And I asked him how he became aware of this. And he said, well, one way was that he had listened to Abigail Schreier and I talk about it. I guess it was 2 years ago when Abigail first put out her book, Irreversible Damage. It was the first podcast I did after I'd been so ill, and I was terrified to do it because it was such a hot topic. And, Schellenberger himself said he listened to that podcast, but he really couldn't believe it. And that's another example of the effectiveness of that tarring.
Yes.
It's so easy to demolish someone's reputation.
And it's especially easy to demolish a reputation.
The far-right label is a weapon of mass intellectual destruction, silencing crucial debates and strangling free thought. Most Americans fear sharing their views, cowering under the threat of social exile. Even respected institutions buckle under ideological pressure, betraying scientific integrity. Peterson and Murray are intellectual warriors, fighting against the inferno of censorship. In this climate of fear, how can we reclaim the courage to engage with controversial ideas?
For people who do not have, as it were, a backlog of published work.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean,
Exactly.
it's relatively easy, but to weigh up someone's views and make an estimation of them if they have 7 books to their name, as I do, or
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of articles. But it can't be the case that only book authors are allowed to say anything about the disintegration of their societies. It's not like you should only be left to people who write newspaper articles.
Yeah. Well, God, no, not that. Like,
Maybe
especially,
least of all. And
well,
but then you go to this question, which, as you know, has come up in Canada in recent years and is very live now in Britain, which is what are people allowed to do? Now, obviously, by the way, and I'm aware, as you always are, of the deep desire of bad faith actors to seize anything I say in this discussion and misrepresent it. So let me do a very boring piece of throat clearing, if I may. The idea that people's response to any problems in their society should be to go out and commit acts of violence is obviously insane and wrong. What we're seeing on the streets of the British cities, though, raises this question, as I say, of if the public keep saying something to the politicians and the politicians keep not just ignoring them, but insulting them, what are they allowed to do, these people? These are populations that have every single election, like the rest of the British people, for 20 years, they have voted for less immigration. I've been told that they'd get it. And instead, it's just gone up.
Britain's elite have betrayed their people, ignoring screams for immigration control while flooding the country with newcomers. The public's concerns are branded far right, silencing legitimate debate. Democracy is a sham, with politicians trampling voters' wishes. Murray and Peterson are prophets of doom, warning of a society ready to explode. How long before the betrayed masses erupt, shattering the UK's fragile facade of multicultural harmony? Peterson and Murray just rip the facade off Britain's cultural catastrophe. If their brutal expose of the Rotherham cover-up didn't shake you to your core, you weren't listening. Hammer that like button if you're fed up with the establishment's lies. Was Murray's prediction of the UK's self-destruction prophetic or paranoid? Debate it in the comments. Subscribe now for more unfiltered, society-shattering analysis that the elites don't want you to hear. Is Tommy Robinson the last voice of the silenced masses, or a symptom of a deeper rot? The battle for Britain's soul is raging. Whose side are you on? Tell us below and join the intellectual resistance.